guys, it's the girl in the middle again, coming to you with another video as promised. This is my second of the year, so we're doing very good. I did promise you a 4-part series on bullying, and today is part 1. Before we go there though, if you have not subscribed, please help me grow this community. Like, subscribe, comment, engage, and share this link if you feel like we've got people in your circle, your peers, or some of your colleagues that might like this kind of content. Please let them know I'm here. Please let them know I'm here. Ask them to subscribe so we can have a full conversation, engage in the comments, and get to info sharing. I am so excited to get to this, not because it's happy and it makes me smile, but because I think it's such important information to share from the perspective of having friends who have kids, but also from the perspective of understanding that bullying has trickled into my life up until last year, and I was in my 30s. So I really want to tackle it from an open and detailed perspective, and that's why it's 4 parts, starting with part 1, which I think will cover bullying 101. So without further ado, let's get started about why I felt that this conversation was important to have. So let's get into why this is such an important topic for me. So I've been bullied, or I started being bullied when I was in grade 3, when I started actually doing the inner child work and trying to track back where certain things started. I realized that the first time that I was actually bullied was in grade 3, and I was bullied throughout grade 3 by somebody specific. And then it started kind of changing, like, you know, the types of bullying, how long it would last, etc. changed as the years went by. But at high school it kind of amplified again, and really just made my time as an adolescent that much harder. So I thought it was really important, because when I was doing the inner work about being a people pleaser, codependency, all these things that I had kind of carried into my years in my 20s and my 30s, I had to start to think about really where this comes from, where it started, what the catalysts were, what the behavior that I've carried, what the behavioral pillars that I've carried into my other years. And the only way to do that again is to really sit down with your inner child, talk to her about what has gone wrong, the things she hasn't been able to get over, and where she has stored them in your adult body. And so when I was doing that during my breakdown, I was realizing that the components of the bullying that started in my adolescent years, the behavior or my responses, have actually stayed alive in my adult years, which could very well mean that I haven't really dealt with that inner body. And so it really got me thinking about, you know, bullying from a holistic perspective, from the perspective of an adult at work, from the perspective of my friends who are now mothers to 11, 12, 13-year-old girls and boys who are at such an impressionable age. And it just made me think, well, it's probably worth it, right? Because for something to exist when you're 12 years old and to still have such a large impact into 30s, 40s, 50s, because you'll see as we go along, bullying really has no specific environment. It needs different catalysts for it to kind of flourish or exist. However, doesn't really discriminate whether it's a rich environment or an impoverished environment. It's really more a psychological journey. So it was really important for me to firstly talk to the adults and say, hey, I know it's really hard for us to get a moment for ourselves where we can just sit and talk to our inner child. Some of us have not gone through therapy or had the opportunity to, so there hasn't been somebody who is actively asking you to attend to that. But I want you to watch this and see, are there components of this that still speak to who I am today? Are there components of this that speak to my experience at work? And then from the perspective of my friends who I love so much, with their beautiful daughters and sons at this age, and they've got 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, right up to 19 at this stage. And those are the most formative years. And I thought to myself, you know, when you are a young mom, whether you have experience with bullying or not, like, who is letting you know that this is how you deal with it in this phase, where there's cyberbullying, online bullying, where there's gaming and all these other things where strangers can penetrate your child? So that is why I thought it was important, because I was taking it from both perspectives, from the perspective of wanting to be a mom one day and wanting to just be equipped with a few things that I would love to know about bullying, and then the perspective of being a human being in the world who might not have dealt with those things. So today is the day we're doing part 1, where most importantly, like I said, said, we're going to do the 101 and just give you a basic rundown of what bullying is so that you're able to identify and checklist yourself. And then with the other parts, you'll see us go into what that turns a child into, what child that adult can turn into, and how it is to deal with a child who is a bully, which is obviously the reverse. So we'll get to all of that, but today let's start with part 1. Now, besides the definition of bullying, I want to talk to you about the 2 components that make bullying what it is. Firstly, bullying is repetitive. It is more than likely going to happen more than once because you almost have to build a certain, I don't want to say journey, that's not the right word. You need to build a certain flow of things that happen. Like you've got to have almost, and it sounds so wrong, but you almost have to have a relationship with your bully so that they understand what triggers you, and that certainly takes time to build. So with that, that's why I say it's like more than often something that happens more than once, because the person is testing to see what the spots are that they can kind of get you at. Whatever type of bullying you're going through, they have to learn you in some aspect, especially if they're going to do it for a while, because obviously they don't do it once and then it makes them feel good and they move away. I mean, these are the components of being a bully, right? The fact that there's something inside a bully that needs to be not tamed, but that needs to be satisfied. And usually we find that with that behavior, the thing that needs to be satisfied is not a once-off thing. So with that then comes the repetitiveness of bullying. So that's the one thing. Bullying is repetitive in its nature. The second thing about bullying is that it is very, by definition, it is an imbalance of power. It's an imbalance of power in the sense that whoever is bullying is coming in with some or other type of strength. They might be coming in with the strength of popularity, which is social strength. They might be coming in with the physical strength, where they're able to bombard you with their physical presence. But there is always kind of an imbalance of power when you're speaking about bullying. So this is an important one to note, because again, we're not only speaking to kids, but we're looking at ourselves in the workplace and looking at, what type of scenarios make you feel like you're being bullied. Like, is this supposed to happen? Is that appropriate to say? Would that feel weird to someone else the way it did to me? Those questions you might ask yourself in those settings, and you very might well fall under one of the bullying pillars. So those are the first 2 things to remember before we go into a little bit more, but I just wanted to kind of round that off. And then the second thing, just to highlight the fact that when you look at adolescence, and this is talking about the years from puberty going into adulthood, those years are so formative. They are the years where you are developing developing self-esteem and confidence in certain pillars, whether it be school, friendships, relationships, etc. And so those are the times where really, while you're getting to know yourself, you're susceptible to people trying to tell you who you should be. And those are the years where those things have the potential to kind of erupt. Bullying, being kind of tagging along to do whatever other people are doing as opposed to standing your ground. Those are the years where it is kind of, where you're very, let's use the word malleable, where you're kind of figuring out who you are. And with that leaves those holes in which people can penetrate and try to tell you who you are, or try to tell you who you're not. So adolescent years, moms and dads, check your kids out, have those conversations, take them out the house and go to the park when they're 9 years old and just catch up on friendships, catch up on acquaintances, what it is what it's like in the playground during lunch, what conversations are being had, who really likes them, who might not like them. But I think it's important to have both spectrums of the conversation so that your child can realize that even in people not liking them, that too is okay. But how also to distinguish between not liking them and bullying. Very, very important. If somebody doesn't like you, you don't necessarily have to feel it. You just have to, you can feel their presence, but you don't have to feel that they don't like you every day in physical or ways that are tangible. You can just feel it in the sense that, okay, that person, we don't play together, we don't talk together, or we don't do lunch together, whatever the case may be. But there is a distinct difference when somebody is bullying you. So let's talk about that today. So let's go into the 3 types of bullying that there are. The first type of bullying is verbal. The second one is social. And the third one is physical. Let's go right back to verbal. So the verbal one is very obvious: taunting, speaking, saying things that are inappropriate, kind of making someone feel bad from an emotional perspective with your words, or sexually saying something sexually inappropriate that puts pressure on somebody, and also very blatantly things like threats are what you would categorize under verbal bullying. When I think about my own perspective, I would say verbal bullying might have been my secondary and not my primary bullying, but I'll tell you a little bit more about that as the parts kind of go by. What I am open to doing is using myself as an example, just so that I contextualize what I mean when I say primary, secondary, tertiary. What I mean by that really is that the primary way that I recall being bullied, it would be whatever it is, and then the secondary would be what I felt, but not as much as I felt the primary. So that's what I mean by that terminology. The second one is social bullying. And this is when you're leaving somebody out. This is scenarios where you're making them feel bad intentionally, or trying to tell people not to be their friend. That is what social bullying is, like leaving people out intentionally, making them feel alone, spreading rumors, any type of embarrassment that can affect their social standing, especially if you can imagine those adolescent years, but also if you can imagine a work environment where you're trying to make new friends, new colleagues, trying to understand an environment, but somebody is working against that with the things that they're saying about you. That is a form of bullying. And then the last one is the physical bullying. So that can go from spitting right through to hitting. Remember, spitting is physical. I might not have touched you, but I've done something incredibly inappropriate by putting my fluids on you unwanted. And then the other example of that would be, the one that it's one that I obviously knew, but one that maybe is just good to remind people that hand gestures are also inappropriate. I remember seeing I can't remember what movie it was, but the guy kept doing this. Like every time he'd see a guy, he'd act like he was about to strangle him. That is bullying. Acting like you're about to strangle someone is bullying. Acting, maybe the zap sign, things like that are considered bullying, because that is a physical act that you are using to try and intimidate another person. And then the other example of this was also breaking people's property. So it could be people who walk past and swipe things off your desk, or they might not have touched you, but it's your property that's in play. That too is bullying. So those three components of bullying, like I said, for me, social bullying was definitely the primary. I felt like a lot of this, the conversation was around why you shouldn't be friends with her, embarrassing conversations about who I really am versus who I want people to believe I am, etc., etc. So that was at the top of the totem pole for me. And then in terms of secondary was verbal, because obviously when it starts to manifest or people want to make fun of you, then they use their words to do so. I was an all-girls school, so there wasn't much physicality. However, we used our words well and not so well. So verbal was definitely there. And the reason why I include tertiary, I actually had to think about it a while, and I think about memories, etc., etc. I would include it in the sense that not because I was hit or spat at in any way, but it was physical in the sense that, like, sometimes my collar would get pulled, and then there was a scenario at a sporting event where somebody used the opportunity during a game to come at me. So in that sense, I felt physical bullying. And the reason why I guess I can attach it to physical bullying is because the same person who was verbally bullying me was the person who did that. So I think it was just another way for them to further show their disdain for me. And so those are the three pillars that I definitely identify certain things from the different pillars. But for me, the two that reign supreme were definitely the social bullying and the verbal bullying. So let's talk about the type of kids that actually get bullied. This is, wow, there's a huge spectrum, because I really want to, let me disclaim this and say that bullying doesn't have an environment. Again, like I said, it can happen in an impoverished environment. It can happen where there's lots of money. It can happen when you're small, when you're big. It can happen in a work environment, in school. It's a psychological thing that is carried through different behaviors. It really is not scenario based. So with that then means that obviously there's different types of people in general who can wind up being susceptible to bullying. But what I thought was important to do was to kind of help identify from the perspective of, again, an adolescent, a child, because that is when the bullying will start and stick, and change who they could have been as an adult. So if anything, it's important to be able to recognize as a child, is my child possibly susceptible? I don't have to freak out or preempt anything, but because my child is A or B, could they be susceptible to that? Or because my child is A or B, I've got to take a more keen look at them when they come back home. Are they okay? Did they have a good day? Did they really have a good day? When they're by themselves, are they crying? How do I penetrate as an adult or as a parent in a way that is like that checks in on your child, but also allows them to still be themselves? So I thought it was very important to just mention this, because kids are so different. But there's so many different ways in which bullies can penetrate them. I think at the core of everything, it's a self-esteem thing. And I also learned when I was researching this that there are studies that show that people with low self-esteem will attract bullies and vice versa, and that this is something psychological that just tends to happen. Like bullies can almost sniff it out. And I believe that. I really do. I really do believe that, because what I've also noticed is that with the bullying, people pleaser, codependent history, you do tend to replicate those people. It won't only be your one bully that you might not have chosen in high school. As an adult, you might start to replicate those type of relationships in other ways. Sprinkle them with a little bit of sweetness and, oh, it's my friend or it's my boyfriend or whatever. However, the components of bullying that you've experienced, but that you've almost grown accustomed to, start to seep into your adult life. So I think it's important to take it from the perspective of a kid. The other disclaimer that I want to say, or the other disclaimer that I want to put out, is that it is always the bully's fault. It is always the bully's fault. It is always the bully's fault. But it's important for us to be as prepared as we can be, because you just don't know who you're going to deal with. So again, this is really not to say these are the only type of people or kids that get bullied. It's more to say, look around kids who are this way inclined and just make sure that you're checking in and that they're okay, and that while they're flourishing at school, that they realize that they deserve that, and that there's no one at school that's making them feel otherwise. So let's go into the first one. The first one is kids who show a lot of success, that are popular in school, because they're achieving and things like that. What that tends to do is it intends to intimidate or trigger something in a bully. What we've learned, or what I've learned from observing bullies, but also the research, is that they too have their own insecurities. So you might find that who you are at your core could be who they could have been, or could be something that intimidates them. And so they want you to feel negatively about that thing that they're not able to reach. So a lot of the time when you're getting positive attention, whether it be from peers or your schoolmates, same thing, peers or your teachers rather, it really could sting a bully, in the sense that they're probably receiving the opposite because they've chosen rebellion instead. The other type of child that you need to watch out for is one that's creative/gifted. Kids who excel at something really well. So it could be maths, it could be art, it could be whatever. Because what tends to happen with them is that they're then prone to awards, they're prone to being recognized in some way, which then puts them under a place where they're seen positively, which again triggers something in a bully for them to want to change your experience of something that should be positive. So that's another thing to look out for. I think also with creative kids, they just want to do what they want to do. I think the other thing that, let me say this, the other thing about creative kids is what they grow into is some of them, and not all, please, it's not all creative kids who end up like this, but what I'm learning with my experiences with the communities that I'm in as a creative myself is that a lot of us grew up with a lot of anxiety, a lot of us grew up with a lot of fear, lack of self-esteem, because already the things that we wanted to do in the world from a creative perspective were not validated or affirmed. So things are looking like there's something in your heart and soul that you want to do that feels like the right thing for you to do, but then the world doesn't really validate it as the thing that you can do for the rest of your life, but you're really good at it. So there's an internal conversation that happens with creative kids, where you're still thinking, should I do this? Am I good enough? Etc., etc. And I think that also makes you really susceptible to people who are ready to really poke at your creativity, poke at your talents, and tell you that you're not good enough. And so another type of child or adult that is really prone to this type of bullying is somebody who's vulnerable, depressed. So people who are also quiet, people pleasers, people who outwardly show that they are, vulnerable. I think with like going back to people who are vulnerable, a lot of vulnerability comes from a lack of confidence, self-esteem, an emotional, I don't want to say emptiness, but an emotional question mark that unfortunately, because there's a question mark for there, almost anything can answer it, whether it be negative or positive, and you believe everything because your self-esteem is not at the place for you to understand who you really are. And so I think when you're dealing with a vulnerable kid or a depressed kid, you're dealing with, it's a push and pull between lack of self-esteem and the fact that bullies love that. So you just need to check on that type of child. And then the next one is one that is very obvious, and one that I think, when I think about bullying in my day, there was the bullying that I've recognized, and then there was just this bullying that was even more unnecessary, and that's bullying around whether you have a disability, a distinct illness, or something that's distinctive about your appearance that is not really the universal norm or whatever people would consider that to be. And people used to get a lot of slack for that. People will, because that's obviously something that people can point out and say, you're not like us. And when you're an adolescent, you're desperate to fit in or to feel like you're similar. And so when somebody keeps pointing something out at you saying, well, that's different, that I can imagine really changes the core of a child. So check in on your children that might have any of this happening. Check in on your child and just check that, yes, they might have friends and that's amazing. But there's another side of that where people in their classes, people who are peers to them that they see every day, are trying to break them down in a way that feels way more heavy than the beautiful friendships that they've been able to carve. So it's really a push and pull and a continuous conversation with your kids just to see where they are with their friendships from a happy perspective and a not so happy perspective, so that they can see it as a conversation that's normal to have. And then lastly, it's just religious. I think any religious, sexual, or racial based bullying is definitely something that we've obviously seen happen a lot. Again, it's really you being different and people either not wanting or caring to understand that, or just wanting to exploit that for their own self-confidence needs. And so those are the type of kids, and again, it could be adults, but those are the type of kids that you really just want to not coddle, but check in on and make sure that in your pocket of creativity, if you're an artist, that you know that this child does art in a way that other grade sixes don't do art. Check in with them. Is anybody else who's as good as you? Is there a teacher who motivates you? How do you feel once you finished an art piece and people like it? How do you feel when people don't show you love because of it? Have a full conversation with the child so that they understand that even when mommy's not around and someone says something mean, that is just one perspective of many that people will have of me, my work, and who I am. But at the core, what's important is who I am as somebody who is living in the world. And then I'm trying to figure out if there's anything more I should say. Okay, let me say this. I want to reiterate why this is such an important conversation to have. Your traits that allow you to be in a position to be bullied when you're an adolescent can trickle into your adult years. It can change the adult that you were meant to be. Ask me, I know. So it's really just important to me to share that information and make sure people realize, things that they can easily recognize within themselves or within their kids. So that's why this is important. It's not something that goes away. Like there's not some alarm bell that rings at 18 years old like, oh, you're free. Not at all. It's actually that energy that turns itself into new energy for you to be susceptible in different environments. So you go from being susceptible in school, university, to being susceptible in work environments and relationships. And that's an important thing to guard, warn, and, be vigorous against, because kids deserve more. And if we can start speaking to them at the time where they're transitioning into a place of, am I confident, am I not, and we're understanding what bullying might have done to them, that's great. I would have loved to have that as an 18-year-old going into my different years, so that I don't bring those traits of neediness, people pleasing, etc. into adult relationships. So I hope that anything, like even if there's one thing that's like, oh my gosh, that's me, it'll be worth it. So thank you so much for joining me for part 1 of bullying, which is really just a 101. I can't wait to get into the next one where I'm going to speak to you about what type of adult bullying turns a child into. And then we'll go into more and more information. I'll share the topics on my IG stories, and I'll be sure to keep you guys updated on when the other videos are coming out. But for now, please subscribe, comment, and like. Share this with all your people who have kids of that age, who want to understand when their child closes the door and is on their cell phone, what to look out for. We will talk about online and cyberbullying and how to be as safe as possible, especially if your child likes YouTube, gaming, and anything that has an interaction that involves comments from people that you do not know. So that is something that I will probably cover in part 4, but stick around, guys. Part 1 is done. So I'll make sure that I will give you all of that information in the other parts. If you do have something you want to ask, something you'd want me to cover, please let me know and I'll be happy to fill that in for you. If it isn't in the video, I'll be sure to put an extra video, either an Instagram reel or share that information on my IG stories referencing your question. But make sure to interact with me. Let me know of scenarios. If you have a child now who's going through something weird, let me know and let's see how far we can get in helping that child emancipate themselves and remember how amazing they are. But that is all for today. I'm happy not because of the conversation or the topic at hand, but I'm happy that we're having conversations. And I'm happy that I'm in a space where God has opened up my throat chakra to be able to have these conversations. I look forward to informing you more, sharing more, and healing, most importantly. But for now, that's it from me. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at @StarKulu. And yeah, I love you guys always. From me, the girl in the middle, to you. Mwah, 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 mwah. See you soon.